of me.
What led you to go from being a postal worker to principal?
I was very lucky. I met a girl, and she said to me, "You had a college degree. Why didn't you go in for teaching?" When I got out of the Army, "Why didn't you go out for teaching?" So I said, "Well, I never took." There were jobs open in the elementary school, and I didn't know what to do about it. So my friend, we were not even girlfriend or boyfriend at that time, not quite. And so my friend said to me, "Come, I'll help you." And she helped me. She got books for me out of the library. She used to go to the library and bring back piles of books. And she would train me in elementary school techniques and so forth.
Who was that? What was her name?
Her name was Laura. And she got me down when I could. I went back to my old college. I wanted to take certain courses so I could, she showed me how to train for the examination, which was a very complicated and difficult exam, and she worked with me. And we got all this preparation. She worked like a Trojan. We got all this preparation done, and I couldn't get my license because I think I failed the first test by 2 points. 65 was the minimal passing mark, and on one section of the group, there were about 5 or 6 sections. On one section I got 63, and so I couldn't pass. So Laura got me to train to appeal the examiner's remarks and so forth. And she brought me a lot of books, and we justified my answers. I had copies of my answers. No, I had about 60, 70 pages of a test. So I copied all the pages. I brought it home when she examined the pages, and we went over there, and she brought me books on how to appeal and appeal. And so finally I ventured and I put in an appeal. And when I put in an appeal, the 63 became a 65. So I passed that section. Thereby, I passed all the sections, and then I had a much higher mark, because my other marks were much higher, and they pulled me up. And so then I became a teacher in the elementary schools. Subsequently, she said, well, "Why don't you go for supervision?"
No, wait a minute. Hold it. You missed one important point.
What was that?
About getting student teaching.
Oh, yes. I had to have student teaching to qualify for my license. I had to have student teaching. And I didn't have it in the elementary schools or the junior high. So I went back to City College, my alma mater, and I applied to the head of the education department, who was a man of German origin, whose name escapes me again. And I asked him to give me some student teaching training. Let me register for a course. I'm a veteran and I wanted a course. And he said to me, and I quote, "We consider you veterans as backwash, and we cannot provide for you. We have to provide for our current students." And he refused. And so, of course, I didn't think I was backwash, and I thought that was a terrible thing for an educator to say. But anyhow, I went out to Brooklyn College, and they wouldn't accept me either. They were taking care of their own students. So Laura said she introduced me to
No, and then you went to Columbia where you got your master's
I got my
degree.
master's at Columbia, and they wouldn't do it.
They said they're more concerned with the national
Yeah,
problem.
the national picture. They weren't concerned about New York City at all. Columbia was nationally oriented. So I went back to Laura, and Laura said she introduced me to Professor Hartung, a woman. And so I went down to Hartung.
Do you remember Professor Helene Hartung?
Helene Hartung was a professor at Hunter College. So Laura told me about Helene Hartung, and she introduced me to Helene, and I went down to Helene Hartung, and I spoke to her. And I said all the trouble I was having, and I said, at that time I was still married, and I had a baby, and I said that I needed a job, and I'm a veteran, and nobody wants to give me this training. They all say I can't do it. So she said, "No problem." She organized a whole class, a whole section of one student, me, for elementary school. I was the only student in that section. And she organized another section, me, for the junior high school. So I had supervision in both. And she appointed teachers to observe me. One student, me. And I passed the courses, and then of course I passed the license. And I became teacher, and I had license for both subjects. And then I went for the high school, I had a license for high school.
Well, that was 1947, 48.
48, yeah.
We got married in 1950. And when you had 7 years of teaching, which is the minimum required,
You had to have 7 years of teaching.
he took the test and he became an assistant principal. And when he was appointed to Herman Ritter as an assistant principal, he went in and to that school, and what was her name? That science.
Ann Pearlstein.
Ann Pearlstein looked at him and looked. She said, "Don't I know you from somewhere?" He said, "That's right. I was a student teacher in your class."
She was my teacher. I was observing her as a student teacher.
And now he came back as an assistant
And
principal.
I came back as a supervisor of
He's
science.
made it fast, right?
Incidentally, when I was in Israel, I saw her name on a plaque where she had contributed a large sum of money for some Israeli purpose, and her name was on a plaque there. She was a screwy woman, but she had moments of being a good person too. But I remember when I was a judge of a science fair, and some kid brought in a display of the lungs of a fish. And Ann Pearlstein and I laughed hysterically, because there were very, 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 very few fishes I ever heard of that had lungs. Had gills, but not lungs. But this kid had a big display of lungs. We had Herman Ritter was a very interesting school, and I miss it a lot. We had a wonderful school there with wonderful students. Again, about 95% Jewish, but they were wonderful kids. By the time I left Herman Ritter, we only had one Hebrew class left. The Jewish kids had left. There one Hebrew class left. Most of the kids in the Hebrew class were black. And when I asked the parents what were the black kids studying Hebrew, the parents didn't want the black kids to associate with the Puerto Ricans. So they told me, if I'm in a Hebrew class, I'll be with Jewish kids, and I'll get a better education. And so they took up Hebrew. I met a girl when Jay was in the High School of Science. I met one of our former students at Herman Ritter, and she was going to the High School of Science. She won a Hebrew scholarship in Ritter, and they sent it to Israel for 1 year. She was a lovely girl. Again, I forget her name.
What, was she
But
black?
I met her in... What's
She
it?
was black?
Black, yeah. She was a nice girl. But it was an interesting school. We had some very terrible experiences with our music programs, which were among the best. Our music programs and our theatrical production were among the best in the city at Herman Ritter.
Yeah, I remember those.
We did stuff that was you could put on Broadway, and people would pay to see it. They were so good. They were wonderful. Incidentally, James and Rowe would do that. When we went to James and Rowe, it was a marvelous school, marvelous school. They had thousands of students there, and once more, we put on productions you could put on Broadway. Hank Greenberg was our baseball player. He used to play out in center field, I think, or something. We saw him every day. Later, he became a famous ball player. But there was, we had some very good schools in those
Or any
days.
questions?
This is
Any
a,
more questions, Alana?
How long were you principal?
in a pair of 60, about 10 years. I was assistant principal 55, about maybe 9 or 10 years, something like that. Principal of a very, very difficult school. It's a very difficult school. The area, they used to call it Fort Apache because it was so dangerous. A lot of drugs, crooks, murderers, and that. It was a very difficult
Right.
school.
Andy, any other questions?
When did you meet? Like you?
Oh, that's an interesting story. I worked with Sam Altman, Laura's first husband. I worked with Sam Altman. We both worked on the same case at the post office. And he used to write letters to me periodically. And then he died, and I didn't know that, and his letters stopped. And I was a little angry about him. But then when I got out of the Army, some of our friends, some of my Army friends, knew Sam Altman and Laura Altman, and they told me that, look, you're getting a divorce or something like that, and why don't you go out with Laura Altman? Meet Laura Altman. So I met Laura Altman, and we struck up a friendship for a number of years. And I was very lucky in that time. And after I was divorced, subsequently we got married.
1950.
But 8/30/50, March, but 8/30/50.